Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new series here on the channel. This series is going to be called Film Fridays, and it's quite self-explanatory as to what this series is. Every single Friday we're going to be talking about film, which is quite exciting because I have a very strong passion behind film, as you can tell from this massive stack of Blu-rays here, because we are going to kick this series off with the 2023 Blu-ray collection showcase. This is an annual tradition on the channel, and this year, as you can tell, the collection has grown. A couple of Blu-rays I had last year I won't have again this year because I have traded a few in order to garner this collection instead. So we're going to run through all of these individually, even talk about a couple of films as they arise, and I'm very proud of this collection so far, but I am obviously looking forward to building it up even further so that then in 2024 we will have a massive collection before you, even more so than this one. So without further ado, let's get into the glorious collection showcase. Okay, so let's just kick this off with some regular bog standard Blu-rays, and the first for this year's collection showcase is going to be Arrival, an excellent film this one, and one that I have an interesting cinema story about because I went to go see this with a good friend of mine called Farah, and I was stupid enough to sneak in some crisps as snacks. Obviously for crunch for crisps is quite loud, and I got told to shut up by the person sitting behind me, which is fair enough. So after that I never bothered bringing crisps into a movie theatre again because they're just simply way too loud. Even louder than popcorn, and that's really saying something because popcorn is annoying enough as is in a theatre. So that's the theatre story I have behind Arrival. I wasn't meaning to make noise, it's just those were my snacks and I didn't think ahead. But moving on, we have City of Ember. I've not watched that one yet, so I should really get around to that. A bunch of these Blu-rays have the same story, such as Trainspotting, one which I picked up because it's notoriously a very good film, but I haven't watched it yet. Now this one I've watched about a couple billion times. Wall-E. I love this movie. And then next up we have How to Train Your Dragon, another animated classic, in fact even more so than Wall-E in my personal opinion, because this was the first film I ever saw in a movie theatre, and I have loved this film ever since. In fact, love isn't strong enough a word. I absolutely adore that movie. But next up we have The Adventures of Tintin. The animation style in this is excellent, and as is for storing the characters, to be fair, so another excellent animated film indeed. But then we have Boyhood, another very good film. It was actually shot over the course of 14 years because for Kid, the actor is the same as he grows up through Boyhood, the title of the movie. Very good film, that very experimental and very unique. But next up we have The Nice Guys, a really fun and fast-paced, like buddy cop comedy type thing. It's generic in the way how I've described it right now, and that's exactly what the film is. It doesn't do anything new, but who cares when it's as entertaining as it is. Next up we have The Wolf of Wall Street. Excellent film, that one. Great direction, great acting. But here we have another film I haven't watched yet, Glory. Very interesting one, that. I can't wait to get around to it. It looks cool based on its cover, and it was also advertised on all of the awards it's won, and I love award-winning films. But next up, speaking of award-winning films, Shawshank Redemption, notoriously one of the best films ever made for damn good reason. I love this movie, and when I found the Blu-ray at one of my local CXs, I got rather chuffed about that indeed. Let me just reach for the rest of these Blu-rays here, because one of them is going to be Jurassic Park, one of the anniversary re-releases. That is my favourite Jurassic Park movie to date. In fact, it's my favourite dinosaur movie to date because it has an excellent blend of wonder and horror. So I love how Spielberg mixes those two elements and makes for both a very beautiful film but a very horrific film at the same time. Next up is Valerian. I couldn't get through the first 20 minutes of this film. It's terrible, but I picked it up because it was incredibly cheap. Now next up we have my favourite film of the year it came out, 2021, A Quiet Place Part 2. I love this movie. I love the editing style in this movie. And speaking of Quiet Place, we have the first one, which in my opinion is just slightly below the second, but it introduced the concept perfectly. I mean, the idea of fear of the unknown as these creatures hunt using sound, and sound is just such a daily thing that humans make, so taking that away is terrifying, and it gives the whole film a very isolated feeling even. So both those films are excellent, and I can't wait for whatever they do next with that franchise. But we have Inglourious Basterds coming up next, a Quentin Tarantino film which I haven't watched yet, but it is one that notoriously isn't amongst its best. Now next up we have The Book Thief, another film I'm yet to have watched. Lady Bird, one of my friend's favourite movies. I couldn't blame him, it looks incredibly good from what I've seen so far, but I need to watch the film in full. And next up we have Psycho, one of the most famous films ever made, and you know, one that really innovated the entire industry, so I cannot wait to check that out. As a film buff myself, I should have checked it out already, and yet I seem to have failed doing that. I'm deeply ashamed. Now next up we have probably my favourite international film of all time, Train to Busan, my favourite zombie film of all time. This is excellent for its character work and the fact that it makes the zombies actually terrifying. Then we have another zombie film, Cockneys vs Zombies. This was hilarious. Like, this is an absolutely garbage movie, but the film knows that, so it takes full advantage of its self-awareness in its tone and its acting to make for a film that certainly is bad, but by God is it entertaining. Then we have Last Night in Soho, one of my favourite films of last year. It was excellent. I love its British setting, me being British myself, of course, and I love Edgar Wright as a director. But moving on, we have Limitless, starring Bradley Cooper, who voices Rocket Raccoon in Guardians of the Galaxy. Still haven't watched that one yet, which is a shock to me. Speaking of ones I haven't watched, American Made with Tom Cruise, another one I have been meaning to watch for ages. And our next one is 3:10 to Yuma, very interesting looking oldie western that. Just like that, it's time for our next batch of movies, starting with The Railway Man. It looks like a very interesting movie, which once again has lots of awards, so can't wait to get into that. Now, Dead Man's Shoes is actually a film which has a very interesting editorial style. We had to break down and analyse a couple of scenes, but those were the only scenes of the film I've watched, so I cannot wait to see this thing in full, and it definitely has an interesting plot behind it. It's dark and gritty, but also in a dark, humorous sort of sense. Next up is Diary of a Wimpy Kid 3 Dog Days. I bought this specifically, or exclusively I should say, for a Scounders video that I was making. I had no reason to buy this, but the film is actually quite alright. It certainly isn't the strongest of Diary of a Wimpy Kid films, but it's better than the animated ones we've gotten so far that are just so bare bones and basic, and this one by comparison seems like an Oscar winning film. Now next up we have Gladiator starring Russell Crowe. There are about 60, 100,000 billion movies under this name, but this one with Russell Crowe is unique because it's the only one with Russell Crowe in it. That's how you distinguish them, the actors, not the names. So there's that for the collection. Next up we have another film I haven't watched yet, The Hateful Eight. And speaking of hateful things, this film is all about bitter men, and we have Dragged Across Concrete. They are bitter, they have rivals, and Dragged Across Concrete, it's named this way because the film is absolutely brutal. For death sequences, for gore, for violence, they are brutal. And I actually kind of like the film for that. It's a great reflection, I suppose, and depiction of actual violence in real life. It doesn't shy away from the brutality of it. And next up we have Overlord, a film I've been meaning to watch for ages, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I've heard mixed things, but this one is notoriously a fantastic film. Mad Max Fury Road, it utilises actual visual effects rather than CGI, and you really do see the effort and passion poured into this film on a visual scale. That's by far the most impressive part behind the film, but the action is just fun to watch. It's an incredibly entertaining film brought about through those visual effects. Next up we have a Disney classic, Bolt. Again, it's a film I must have watched hundreds of times throughout my childhood, and I adore this movie. I understand even it's not the best Disney animated film, but little 7-year-old me didn't care about that. It's got a cute dog in it, and it's effectively a superhero movie, in quotation marks right now. I love a good superhero movie. But moving on, we have a box which has certainly seen better days, The Accountant. Yeah, CX don't always take good care of the packages, but that was an interesting film starring Ben Affleck and Anna Kendrick. But moving on from there, we have It, Chapter 1, the remake, which is pretty decent. I will admit I have some fun with that one. But moving on, we have The King's Speech, yet another award-winning film, especially for Colin Firth, who got his Oscar for Best Actor from this movie. So cannot wait to get around to watching that one. Next up is Black Klansman, a film I saw in theatres and enjoyed very much. Next up we have 2001 A Space Odyssey. The beginning of this film kind of tricks you. It's just 5 minutes of absolute darkness. So if you have a power cut in those first 5 minutes, you just feel as though you're actually watching the movie. But all jokes aside, A very artistic and excellently crafted movie, another one of which is Apocalypse Now. Notoriously one of the best films ever made. Haven't watched it yet, I should really get around to that, again being a film buff and all that, but it's one that I picked up for its notorious quality. Next up we have Nightcrawler starring Jake Gyllenhaal, one I picked up after I watched Spider-Man Far From Home, because Jake Gyllenhaal is a villain in that movie, and Jake Gyllenhaal also stars in that movie as an interesting character, so I can't wait to get around to watching that eventually. I picked it up ages ago, and lots of these films, the common factor is that I haven't watched them yet, but I have unfortunately seen Murder on the Orient Express, which certainly isn't one of my favourite murder mysteries out there. Rian Johnson does a much better job with the formula for his Knives Out films, whereas these murder films, even the sequel that followed this one, wasn't really all that good. Now next up we have Creed 2. This had a number of production issues, so it's a miracle that this came out as good as it was, but this is one of my favourite all-time boxing films. A stellar and investing film from beginning to end. But moving on, we have Inception. Excellent plotline, very clever with its gimmicks, with its editing style, with its visuals. It's entertaining too, so it just really checks off every box for what makes a great Christopher Nolan movie. And this isn't even his best movies. That goes to show you how talented a director Christopher Nolan is. Next up, we have Marley and Me. This film will make you cry, so make sure you have your tissues on hand, especially if you love dogs. I do, which is why I bought it in the first place. X-Men Days of Future Past, one of my favourite X-Men movies, and a very cheap pickup, so why the hell wouldn't I get it? Next up, we have Onward, a really underrated Pixar movie. The ending in particular is very, very good, and not nearly does it receive even the praise that it deserves. Now next up, we have High Plains Drifter, starring Clint Eastwood, one of his famous Western movies, so I cannot wait to check that out at one point. It's got a cool name too. High Plains Drifter, really rolls off the tongue. But next up we have another Pixar classic, Soul. It won an Academy Award for Animated Feature of its year, and it's easy to see why. I mean, this is an animated film that, yeah, sure, kids can watch it, not be scarred for life, but the themes are so mature, it's basically a film for adults, and I love that. Sorry for the glares there, guys. But next up we have Love Actually. Some people have the audacity to call this the best Christmas movie. For me, it's probably within the bottom 5. I hate this movie, and it's incredibly famous. I hate that about it too. Bought it anyway. That's the thing with a lot of these Blu-rays. No matter what I think of a movie, I pick them up anyway to add them to the collection, because some of them can be so cheap and I can just go to CX, grab an entire stack. Like at one point I grabbed an entire stack and Abominable was just thrown in there. Why the hell not? It's a very difficult name to pronounce, but the movie is perfectly enjoyable. Sure, it plays it safe. The story isn't anything new, or it's not even something we haven't seen before, but who cares, as the visuals are stunning, and it's going to keep its target audience engaged because it's universal, so it's intended for 5-year-olds, and 5-year-olds are guaranteed to enjoy this. I am 5 at heart, so I enjoy it all the same. Next up is Ponyo. I cannot believe I haven't watched this yet. I used to watch trailers of this on one of my old videotapes when I was younger, and I always wanted to watch this movie. I've gone ahead and bought it on Blu-ray now and still not seen it. It's a crime, I'm telling you. 5-year-old me would be jealous that I've owned the movie for this long and that I haven't watched it yet. But next up we have Tom Cruise's Oblivion. I haven't watched that one yet either. I am on a Tom Cruise craze right now after Top Gun Maverick, so I should really get to watching that movie at some point. Next up we have Will Smith, I, Robot, as well as Manchester by the Sea, another very British movie, and I love myself incredibly British movies, and in this one, well, it's Will Smith starring in I, Robot. What's not to love? Though I haven't seen either of those films yet, which again is criminal. Let's just grab all of these Blu-rays down here so we can start with Speed, a very famous movie about a bus that needs to carry on travelling at above a certain speed limit, or the bomb on the bus will go off. You can see from the explosion right there what it's hinting at. An action movie with a very simple premise, and it's intense. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, so it works for what it is. But next up is Spider-Man Homecoming, one of my favourite Spider-Man movies. Obviously not even the best of the MCU trilogy, but I love what they do with Peter Parker's characters, the twists and turns that it takes based on the source material and based on the Spider-Man movies we've seen already. They were needed changes that really justify the film's existence. But next up we have Darkest Hour. I really enjoyed this one in the theatres as well, being about Winston Churchill. It's very British, but also it has its intense moments, which is great. But it's a side to World War II you don't usually see, and it's a compelling drama indeed. But next up we have Kung Fu Panda. You can't go much wrong with Kung Fu Panda. I love me a little bit of Kung Fu Panda. Now next up we have The Invisible Man, yet another fantastic horror movie, excellently acted. The tension, the body horror, it's all it all builds to something spectacular in the end. Then we have two more films. Pacific Rim, one of my favourite Guillermo del Toro films. It has action, it has excellent visual effects and storytelling. And the kaiju aren't really monsters. They are effectively the personification of karma, because they are brought about by global warming and climate change. You know, in other words, we're killing off our planet, and we inadvertently made an atmosphere that these creatures could kill us in. Yeah, Guillermo del Toro has a common theme throughout his films, which is that humans are the true monsters. And I love that about his films. Very strong themes indeed. But speaking of very strong themes and visuals, you've seen Midsommar now for the last 30 seconds, and it's another film which I find highly underrated. A lot of people don't like this film. It's not nearly as good as Hereditary, don't get me wrong. The director has done better. But it's still a fine, horrific, visually shocking thrill ride from beginning to end. You could go as far to say it's another film that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Now next up we have one of my favourite childhood classics, Coraline. That really does push the boundaries of being PG, because there is some really strong horror images in there that children would be terrified of. I remember my sister specifically, first time we watched it, she could not finish it. She was too scared of the movie. But next up we have For Men Who Stare at Goats. I bought this film for the title alone, because it's just such an odd title. It stands out. Plus the yellows really make it have a sharp colour contrast and stand out amongst the rest of my Blu-rays. Next up is The Theory of Everything. A little bit of scuff on the packaging there, but luckily I will get a batch of replacement Blu-ray cases to just switch over the art case on the back here, and then I have a decent box with a decent piece of cover art. Now The Theory of Everything, I've been meaning to watch that film for ages, but I'm glad I own Blu-ray now, because it got taken off of Netflix, which is truly tragic. Rise of Planet of the Apes, one of my favourite trilogy starters. This film is excellent. It really does establish what this trilogy is going to explore on a deeper level, on a fantastic scope, mind you. So next up we have Birds of Prey and the Fabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, easily one of my longest Blu-ray titles. This film is just really entertaining and fun. Margot Robbie does a great job acting in this film, and the fact that it's told out of sequence and out of order to parallel the fact that Harley Quinn is a unreliable narrator is just a really well executed film that really does a great job getting you into the mind of Harley Quinn and how messed up that mind truly is. Next up we have I Am Legend. For some reason Will Smith always loves starring in films that begin with I am something or another. This film is very sad. It got me very emotional over certain deaths that occurred, but you know, that emotion behind the film, it really invests you. Now next up we have Superbad. It's incredibly funny, and the characters really they roll off each other very well. The chemistry in particular is very well captured, and it's just a film I have fun watching, which is why I picked it up, because why not pick up a film that you find entertaining now, right? Next up we have yet another Edgar Wright movie, Baby Driver. I love how this was shot. The dialogue is fantastic, as characters really have chemistry with one another, and it's just entertaining and a thrill ride from beginning to end thanks to the fast pacing of the movie. Next up we have a film simply called Utopia. Yeah, starring Josh Brolin. So that right there is Thanos. At least Thanos when he's not purple, mind you. Then we have A Monster Calls, a very like quaint, fun little adventure, and the character arcs in here are excellent. It's basically that monster tells this kid here stories as he has to deal with his mother who's constantly getting sick, and so it's basically a coping mechanism for him, and it's a really great personification of his character, his worries and concerns, and the stories are exactly what he needs to hear in order for his character to grow. It's fantastic. But speaking of fantastic, Spotlight, Academy Award winner. Not watched it yet. I want to, because if it's an Academy Award winner, it has to be good, especially for what I look for in film, which is for compelling drama. Now, Spotlight is also the name of a Scander, so that's pretty cool, as I love Scanders, in case it isn't abundantly clear. Next up is The Conjuring, an excellent horror film. That one of the best horror films ever made. I'd go as far to say it's just really, well, it's terrifying first and foremost, which is important in a horror film. But I like the characters, which is why I don't want to see harm come to them. But next up we have Schwarzenegger, one of the best sequels of all time, one of the few sequels to actually rise above its predecessor, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. I do think that is the better Terminator movie, though that debate has been sparked for decades now. We have Unbreakable, still the best of the Glass, Split, Unbreakable trilogy. Now we have Jason Bourne as well. We'll see more from Jason Bourne later. I, Tonya, a very compelling drama film with some excellent performances. I adored watching that in theatres. Next up we have Snatch, another famous film that I've been meaning to watch for ages now, but just haven't quite gotten around to yet. My deepest apologies to myself for that one. Kung Fu Panda 2, the first Blu-ray I ever picked up. I adore this movie. It's better than the first on every conceivable level. It's more emotional, the action sequences are more intense, the animation is obviously upgraded. But next up we have Parasite, my favourite film from the year it came out, which is why I'm so glad it won Oscar for Best Picture, as well as I think 7 or 8 other Oscars. An absolutely clean slate, and it deserved that because this film is excellent. The next up is a Mel Gibson gloriously entertaining action film. It's literally as advertised, and I love myself some mindless violence and action from time to time. So Mel Gibson Bloodfather is our next for the collection, but then that's followed up by Gravity, some notoriously stellar visual effects, which I haven't yet watched, so hopefully the Blu-ray will capture those visual effects in their stunning nature, once I finally get around to watching it, that is. Next up we have Once Upon a Time in the West, or In the West I should say, because that's the title. It's a very famous title. How did I mess up the title? I suppose it's because I haven't watched the movie yet. I really need to watch a movie. Next up we have Avengers Assemble. Obviously I love this one, being a big Marvel nut. It did everything right. It drew together 5 previous films in a satisfying way to reward those of you who watch them all, but at the same time it can be seen as its own isolated chapter within a bigger story that you can perfectly enjoy as its own side piece. You don't need to watch the 5 films leading up to it, you can still perfectly understand it. And speaking of understandable films, Gremlins! Obviously this isn't part of some big cinematic universe and it's not a big crossover event, but it is certainly a lot of fun to watch this movie. Now next up is the Kite Runner, which got stuck to the top of the invention of Lion here. This film had a really interesting premise. In this world you are incapable of telling lies, and then all of a sudden this guy's character says one and begins being capable of lying. But obviously because in this world lies don't exist, anything he says is taken as the immediate truth, so he can make stuff up and it's taken as the truth. So he literally invents God, which, you know, gives the implication that God is a lie. So this film basically has an interesting premise, but its execution is awful and it's offensive at times, even though it's meant to be taken lightheartedly and comedically. But the problem is that it's just not funny. And then Kite Runner is a film I haven't watched yet, but no doubt is a lot better than the invention of Lion. It's not difficult to be better than the invention of Lion. And next up we have Iron Man 3 as well as Creed. We had the sequel earlier, so another sequel and a predecessor to a sequel. Pretty interesting those. Iron Man 3, very underrated MCU film, just because it's not the same as the comics doesn't make it bad by default. Next up we have Ant-Man, my favourite character from the MCU. Not my favourite film from the MCU though, but it is a light-hearted diversion from the regular, serious, darker tone of the rest of the MCU film. So it's just nice to throw this on to lighten up the mood and give you a fast-paced heist movie that is different in tone to other MCU classics. But speaking of MCU classics, one of my favourite MCU films of all time, Captain America: Winter Soldier. This film is just epic on every level. It's got political thriller type elements and it's just such an enjoyable watch. But next up we have Two Moles for Sister Sarah, an interesting name, that one. The name is, again, the main reason as to why I picked it up in the first place, but I cannot wait to check that out and see what it's got going for it. Next up is Guardians of the Galaxy, my favourite MCU film of all time, the first MCU film I ever saw in a theatre. It's one of the reasons why 2014 was such a highlight film for a year for films, even for me, because this came out in 2014, as did for Winter Soldier. My top 2 MCU films both came out in the same year. Let's say it's easy to explain as to what works about that film. It's the group dynamic. They are hilarious, they play off each other very well, and it just makes for such an enriching and hilarious time that you're entertained by the fast-paced nature from the beginning to end. It doesn't ever slow down, that movie. But next up we have Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. I haven't watched that one yet, but it's another Guillermo del Toro film, and I love him as director, so I cannot wait to see how his style influenced that film with its comic book origins. Next up, we have Real Steel, yet another fun, fast-paced, like box movie of robots. Was not to love because the visual effects are excellent. Now, next up, we have Black Swan. Do not watch this as a family because it has some very dark themes, even some gratuitous violence, despite it being a film about ballerinas, I believe. But ballerinas come from a dark industry, apparently. At least that's what this film would imply. It's excellent. I love the acting. I believe Natalie Portman got an Oscar for her performance in this, which is definitely justified, and I thoroughly enjoyed the film, even though right now I clearly have no idea what I'm talking about. That's what happens when you watch hundreds of films a year. Sometimes films just amalgamate together and you forget specific details. Arena. Haven't seen this one yet. I picked it up because it was 50p and it was in good condition, so perfect for the collection. Next up is Crimson Peak. I bought this because it was one of the films we had to study for our popular horror module in university. And what's great about Crimson Peak is, well, its name is pretty cool. Plenty of crimson within the colour palette. But it's just a really nice, like, return to gothic horror. It has fantasy elements mixed in there, so it just really is a great exploration of the genre. It subverts expectations, and Guillermo del Toro once again knocked out of the park with this one. So next up, we're going to be going with American Sniper, yet another Bradley Cooper film, which I have not watched. Clearly, that film and Limitless are the exact same movie, because I haven't watched either, and they star the exact same person. Coincidence? I think not. But enough has been said. We are now moving on to yet another Academy Award winner. We got 12 Years a Slave and Hereditary. We was alluding to this earlier. An excellent movie, this one, with a really sticky top to the Blu-ray. That's rather tragic, which is why these two stuck together, and now I'm showcasing them in the same shot. They're both great movies and they deserve to be in a shot together. Now, next up is The Ghost. Not watched this one, but it looks interesting based on the cover art. Land of the Dead. I'm shocked I haven't watched this one yet. Once again, it's a very famous, iconic movie, so it's one I should definitely get around to at some point. I hope to get around to it at some point. Every one of these Blu-rays I have the intention of watching, but unfortunately I don't have 24 hours a day to sit through and watch them all. Not all at once anyway. Magnificent Seven is next. I actually really enjoyed this one. Perfectly fun Western movie with a very tragic ending, mind you. Next up we have The Inbetweeners 2. The Inbetweeners being a very famous British comedy series, which effectively is a coming of age because you are being able to relate to these teenagers as they're growing up. They're in between that teenage life and that adult life, and as you're transitioning yourself as a British teen, you can really connect to that comedic style and those characters. Though the movies aren't nearly as good as the TV show, shall we go as far to say. Now next up we have Deja Vu, a very interesting sci-fi movie. You truly do get sense of deja vu throughout the film because Danielle Washington literally goes back in time for it. Very interesting indeed. But next up is going to be a little bit of Hugo, the name of a Scarlet's NPC of all things, and this one is a 3D version, but I don't have 3D TV or glasses, so you just stuck with a regular 2D version, and it's a perfectly neat, fun little film that has depth and layers, as the Scorsese film should, but it's also, as you can tell from the rating, child friendly, so a more adult audience can engage with the deeper themes and meaning, and then kids have fun little visuals and harmless comedic moments to enjoy the film on its entertainment level. Now next up is going to be a little bit of Widows, a fantastic film this one. Excellently acted, the action is intense and it just really hooks you and keeps you invested. But next up is going to be Shazam, one of my personal favourite DC movies because it's so much fun. The actors are clearly having fun too, and they're just contagious. You have fun alongside the actors as these characters have excellent chemistry and you just grow to like them. You care about what happens to them specifically, so that's important in a film. It makes the action sequences all more intense because you want them to make it out alive, you want them to be alright because you like these characters. Anyway, next up we have James Stewart is Harvey. Very cool, that one. It was part of the 100th anniversary of Universal, so they re-released that as a Blu-ray, restored in HD, could go as far to say. Next up was Blinded by the Light. Saw this film maybe a month early because it was part of a Cineworld unseen screen in a way. So before we actually watched this film, we had no idea what the film was going to be. Then they showed it this film, and it was really good. It had really nice dramatic elements to it. The characters had chemistry. You learned to care about these characters. This is coming of age, and these characters are also passionate, which is why you care about them so much. But say the character arcs in this film are excellent, and it covers a historical basis which my mum could connect to because she remembered all of this history. It's recent history, that. So very fun and captivating film indeed. But next up is going to be Blade Runner, the originals, with Harrison Ford. In fact, he's in both of them, but this is the final cut, so it's going to be confusing. I'm going to have to watch it multiple times, but I'm very much looking forward to it. It's got some really open-ended questions which you are kind of left to speculate about on your own accord, and it's a very interesting, well-made film in that manner. Next up is The Artiste, yet another Academy Award winning film, that one. I can't wait to watch it. And then we have The Armstrong Lie. Again, very sharp and contrasting colours. It does stand out from the front of it anyway, because the black and the yellow makes me be reminded of bumblebees, I guess. But moving on, Live, Die, Repeat, an excellent action film, well, action sci-fi. It has interesting visuals, which makes it unique and distinctive. You need that in a sci-fi film, and the action is also incredible, so it takes advantage of both the genres. It mixes to make for a film with excellent acting. Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt really play off each other very well, and it's just a thoroughly entertaining film. An underrated one at that. Not nearly does it ever deserve the praise that it calls for. But next up we have The Counselor Extended Edition, so I'm going to have to be watching this for an extra 15 minutes whenever I decide to actually play it, mind you. But we saw the In-Betweeners 2 earlier, now we have the first In-Betweeners movie. I think this one is slightly better, but it's still not nearly on the same level as the TV show. Next up we have Dazed and Confused, yet another famous film. It's notoriously incredibly funny and entertaining to watch. Haven't watched it yet myself though, so I need to change it at some point. Then we have one of the most famous horror movies ever made, The Exorcist. Obviously it's restored in HD for that Blu-ray, so I can't wait to get around to that. And you could say the exact same for Rear Window. Can't believe I haven't watched this one yet. As a film buff, I'm really letting myself down, because next up we have the 40th anniversary edition of The Italian Job, which I also haven't watched yet. What is wrong with me? Next up we have Alpha. I really enjoyed this one in theatres, so when I saw it at CEX for a decent price, I snagged it up immediately, because it's actually a really great reflection of the history behind dog becoming man's best friend. The bond these two build over time is spectacular and so well captured on film. The cinematography, the effects, everything is excellent in this film, very well crafted, and it's one of Sony's best films to come out of recent years, because Sony Pictures notoriously doesn't make some of the best films, but that one is an exception. Next up is Good Boys. Just a fun, light-hearted little comedy, really, in the same vein as Superbad, and I enjoy it for the same reasons as Superbad. But next up we have my favourite Christopher Nolan movie, Interstellar. This is what I was alluding to when I said Inception isn't even Nolan's best film, because this one, for visuals, for story, they're just on a whole nother level altogether, and it's so captivating. I love that movie. The next up, we have Daniel Craig in Defiance, a fun name, that. I picked it up because I like Daniel Craig as an actor and I like the name, plus it's a nice addition to the collection, one which I will hopefully watch someday. Next up we have the Lego Movie. We all know why this film is so much fun. It's fast paced, the animation is excellent, and it's just overall one of those films which you can't get out of your head. It's so memorable that way. But next up we have Insurgent. I bought this thinking it was Interstellar from Christopher Nolan. I was wrong. I've not seen this film before, but I've heard it's garbage. Well, it's not so garbage on the other hand. It's Paranorman, yet again a film that really pushes its PG rating. Like Coraline, it has some really horrific images, and the themes in this film are so incredibly dark, but you get to sympathise and learn about these characters, and it just creates a setting which is unique and fun to explore to a depth that you don't regularly see in children's films. So Paranorman is definitely on my recommended list. Oh crap, half of my Blu-rays has dropped off my bed that I'm putting them on beside me right here. I best go fix that. Okay, now that has been sorted, let's finish off with this last batch of regular Blu-rays I have here, beginning with Lone Survivor, starring Mark Wahlberg. Looks like it's going to be an incredible film based on the reviews, so I can't wait to check that out. Hellboy, another film I've been meaning to get around to for ages now. I cannot wait to check this out in its Blu-ray HD glory. Brick is a very interesting and confusing film with visuals from Rian Johnson before The Last Jedi that have a significant amount of intrigue behind them. Like, you're just thrown into a confusing setting and kind of just learn to piece it together by yourself, and it's just an absolutely mad film. I enjoyed it thoroughly though. And next up is The Breakfast Club, another film I've been meaning to get around to for ages because it is a classic. It is constantly referenced with the iconic hand gestures and all that, so I cannot wait, like I said already, to get around to watching that. Hell or High Water, I've heard of this film before I picked it up. It's got a cool name and it's got an Oscar nomination for Best Picture under its belt, so definitely one worth checking out, and I can't wait to do such a thing. Now, E.T., a childhood classic, at least it would be if I watched as much throughout my childhood. I did see it a couple of times, here or there, never from beginning to end, so actually I finally got to watch it from beginning to end in a theatrical setting of all places, and boy, this film is a classic with good reason. It's just such a likeable and charming film. It has childish nature for Bond, the alien, and the kid develop. It's just so incredibly well crafted, invested, and fun for children to engage with and also take away a message from. It has themes behind it that even adults can connect with, so it's just a multi-generational film. But next up is not Hang On, it's called Cliffhanger. Hang On is the tagline. It's one of Stallone's action classics, so I cannot wait to finally get around to watching that. I love myself a mindless Stallone action thriller. But next up is Looper, another Rian Johnson film. Bruce Willis in it this time. Cannot wait to watch this. It's one of the only films from Rian Johnson I haven't watched yet. I want to see what he did before The Last Jedi came out and ruined his reputation as a director, because he's actually a really talented director. Brick and Looper are excellent examples of that. Knives Out and Glass Onion even more so. Next up is The Shape of Water, Guillermo del Toro's Best Picture winner, and boy does it deserve it. This film is excellent for colour palette, cinematography. It just tells a compelling and investing story through a unique and approach even to filmmaking, a unique approach, and it's just spectacular from beginning to end. I thoroughly enjoyed watching it. But next up is Life of Pi, a very famous film. Like, this film is quoted by people almost on a daily basis, sometimes without people even noticing it, because it's a very memorable film. But I haven't watched it yet, so I'll have to change that hopefully in the near future. Next up is Beautiful Boy. I heard good things about this movie, so I finally picked up the Blu-ray, and I plan on watching that very soon. But next up we have a Liam Neeson thriller for Commuter, followed by The Fighter, starring Mark Wahlberg. We've seen him before and we get to see him again because, surprise, surprise, actors are in multiple movies. Who saw that one coming? Now, next up we have Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, one of my favourite Edgar Wright films, and as Edgar Wright is one of my favourite directors, that makes it one of my favourite all-time films. Very fun and enjoyable. It's fast-paced and everything you want to see in a film of this style. It's executed to perfection. And speaking of perfect execution, Blair Witch Project, it's basically the origins of the found footage type genre. You know, college kids go out into the woods and the only thing that's recovered from them are their recordings. It's very interesting indeed. And then we have Dragonheart, very famous movie based on its name, and it has some of the greatest film speeches of all time. So those are 3 excellent Blu-rays within my collection. We're going to just grab a handful here, including at the very bottom, one of my newest pickups, Bad Times at the El Royale, which CX did a terrible job of packaging, but it was a cheap enough price and it's a damn good movie. Though I don't remember too much about it besides it's a really unique editorial style and the flair within the cinematography, bringing attention to the drama and the chemistry these actors possess with one another. Well crafted film indeed, and thoroughly entertaining. But next up is Wonder Woman, the original, the good one, as Wonder Woman's character is actually flawed, which makes her all the more compelling and relatable. So that's very important for a hero such as her, who's as powerful as she is, and the action sequences are fun as well. So you love the action, you love the acting. That's what makes Wonder Woman a fantastic film, mind you. But next up is All the Money in the World. Interesting name, that one. Once again, we're starring Mark Wahlberg. It has 4 stars all over the box, so hopefully I will find it to be a 4-star film when I eventually get around to watching it. And next up is The Festival. This came out during lockdown, so obviously it started off as a deluxe priced streaming film, but I eventually got around to watching or buying the Blu-ray for a much cheaper price. I heard mixed things, but here we have the remake of True Grit, and let's just say Grit is very appropriate for the title because Hailey Steinfeld's character goes through absolute hell in this movie, but her obstacles, how she overcomes them, her intelligence, and her having to deal with all of this opposition just for being a woman, it's a very captivating film indeed, thoroughly enjoyable from beginning to end, and I bought it mainly because I really enjoy Hailey Steinfeld as an actress, so getting to see her in this western setting, it's very different from all of her other films, and like I said, I enjoyed it. It's simple as that, really. But moving on, we have a little bit of Room. I love this one. It has Brie Larson, and the kid in this is one of the best performances from a 4-year-old I've ever seen, if not the best, because man, you buy into the fact that this 4-year-old is trapped in a room with his mother, and so half of the film's dedicated to their escape, and the other half is them dedicating to life outside of this room that's the only thing this child has ever known. What a captivating film, the drama, the acting, it's just so well crafted. But next up we have Pan's Labyrinth, another one of my newest pickups. CX fucked up on sticker on this one as well, but another one of Guillermo del Toro's classics, one of his only films I haven't seen yet, which is why I picked it up. I want to own it physically for when it inevitably gets taken off of Netflix. But now we have our final handful of these regular Blu-rays here, starting with The Prestige. I believe this one is Christopher Nolan, I hope it is now that I've said such things, but very prestigious title, shall we say, and I cannot wait to get around to watching that one at some point. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, I love this one. The actors had some really great chemistry with one another, and it was just a really heartwarming, fun-filled movie, and I love the character arcs here. It's what made it just such a feel-good experience. Detective Pikachu, when it comes to movies even based on games, this is one of the best. It has just a really captivating world because Pokemon run rampant. The designs for the most part are spectacular. I love the acting as well, even though the film didn't really call for spectacular acting, so it's not exactly like they're perfect performances, but they're poor performances that were justified for these characters, is what these characters needed. And as a result, the film was fun, but nothing that really breaks the mold and makes for something that is an absolutely outstanding movie. It's just fine, perfectly fine, and that's okay by me. But moving on, we have Cars. Basically my childhood, this movie. I have seen this maybe millions of times. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but still, I had this on loop. I maybe watched it twice a day because I loved it as a kid. And could you blame me? I mean, first of all, it's got a race car in it. I loved race cars, but it's just such a feel-good film. The finale is spectacular. The character arc McQueen goes through, like, sure, it starts out as unlikable, but that's what makes his character arc all the more satisfying for me personally. And it's a film to where no matter how many times I revisit it, I have that nostalgic kick, and I adore this movie even more every single time I rewatch it. It has layers that as a kid I didn't even pick up upon. It addresses that dual audience where adults can enjoy it and kids can enjoy it. My parents weren't infuriated by watching it hundreds of times, in other words. Next up we have Jaws. Yeah, classic Spielberg, that he introduced film techniques in that film that have stuck, and it's just, the cinematography isn't just needless, it's not a tech demo, it actually does a great job of bringing you into the mindsets and fear of these characters. Next up is Creature of the Black Lagoon, I believe it's called, or Creature from the Black Lagoon. Not watched it yet, but it looks interesting, especially from the cover art right there. Now next up is Cass. Interesting name, that one. Very simple, very memorable, but I am still yet to watch it, unfortunately. Judas and the Black Messiah. I've been meaning to get around to this film for ages. It's going to have some spectacular performances, I can tell you that, in confidence, because the actor is very good in pretty much everything he does. Cannot wait to sit through that. And now that's reminded me of Nope, the most recent film that the actor is in. So I suppose next year you'll see that as part of the Blu-ray collection. Spoiler alert, I don't have it, not yet. But Judas and Black Messiah film I'm very much looking forward to getting around to. But speaking of films I'm looking forward to watching, Cabin in the Woods. I've seen this before already. It's a subversion of classic horror tropes, which is what makes it so well crafted, and I cannot wait to rewatch it because it was so entertaining and fresh. You got something new from watching that film, which is what makes it so worth watching. Next up is Cowboys vs Aliens. That film very much disappointed me. I mean, it's a blend of fantasy, blend of Western blend of sci-fi. How often do you see Western and sci-fi come together? For tropes and for conventions are complete opposites. But this film did not work on execution for me. It's a bit dull and overly long. Next up is Super 8, another Spielbergian classic. I watched it when I was very young, and I haven't watched it since, so I need to get around to that. And you could hear the regular DVD jittering around as I displayed it to you. But our final one of these regular Blu-ray movies, Snoopy and Charlie Brown and Peanuts movie. One of the most surprising films I've ever seen. Coming from Blue Skies, I was not expecting anything special from this film. It is heartwarming. The character arcs are spectacular and they have excellent chemistry with one another. It's just a thoroughly enjoyable film for all audiences, which is why Snoopy and Charlie Brown and Peanuts movie is a recommended watch from yours truly. But now we are going to move on to the collector's sleeves. Okay, let us finally move along to the collection sleeves, where we get kicked off by Daniel Craig's 007 Skyfall. Very interesting collector's sleeve that. I love the white and black contrast, it really stands out. But next up is Dying of the Line. Yeah, Nicolas Cage film, and I'm pretty sure Nicolas Cage is captivating in this because as an actor he's particularly likeable. But next up is Tenet. Really interestingly well-made, well-crafted film. Christopher Nolan once again on a visual level, and with the story he confused us but captivated us in Tenet. It's just a perfectly enjoyable film. The next up is going to be Django Unchained. Boy, is this film entertaining. The cinematography, the characterization, the acting of those characters, it's just all culminates into a fast-paced and entertaining movie that I thoroughly enjoyed from beginning to end, to be perfectly frank with all of you. Next up is Chris Hemsworth in 12 Strong. I just know him as Thor, so seeing Thor in a role that isn't Thor, well, it's pretty cool. Can't wait to get around to watching that because I haven't watched it yet. But moving on, we have Get Out, one of my all-time favourite movies. I love this for social commentary, just the awkwardness of the situation, being the only black person there. I don't quite connect to that scenario on a personal level, but I can see what makes it just so well crafted and how it connected to so many people on that personal scale, because it just has those relatable elements to it. Now, next up is The Amazing Spider-Man. I love this collector's sleeve. It was textured right there, so I actually felt my hand along Spider-Man's face right here. Definitely not the best Spider-Man movie. It's much better than its crappy sequel, and it's a shame that they wasted Andrew Garfield's talent on a much lesser Spider-Man script. Next up is Don't Breathe. I love the tension behind this horror film. Once again, it's similar to A Quiet Place in the fact that if you don't make noise, you'll be absolutely fine because they're dealing with the might of a blind guy. The second film took up a completely different genre as it went for that action film rather than the horror film. So it's why I prefer this one overall, because that tension, it immerses you and it keeps you on the edge of your seat throughout. So I also love the fact that the characters are all, in a way, completely irredeemable and horrid people. It's just, it makes the deaths a lot more satisfactory, but at the same time you sympathise with certain ones, and so their chemistry is also fantastic. And in other words, it's just a really great character study, and it's what makes the film as well crafted as it is. I picked it up on for the sole reason that I enjoyed the movie. But next up is Schwarzenegger in Total Recall. Haven't watched that one yet, so I'll have to get around to it. But Cars 2, similar to the first one, I saw this hundreds upon hundreds of times as a child, and I don't think it's nearly as bad as people make it out to be. A lot of that is bias speaking, but a lot of it is also the fact that this is a fast-paced action movie, so even if you don't like the film all that much, at least it's over quickly. Next up is going to be Jurassic World, the ultimate popcorn movie, because boy is it trash, but it is so goddamn entertaining, so you don't care. You consume it anyway, knowing it is bad, but you enjoy it. And sometimes that's exactly the kind of film you need, just something that you can turn your brain off and have some fun watching. Now next up is Legend of the Guardians, highly underrated animated film. The animation in particular is stunning. If I showed you clips of this and told you the animation was from 2010, you wouldn't believe me because it is that spectacular. The characters do leave a little bit to be desired, and the story does have its generic moments, but ultimately it's a dark story that really does hook you. You're invested, you care about these characters even if they are a little bland, but their chemistry with one another is spectacular. You care about characters more so impacting other characters, you know, creating a chain event of things. The villain isn't nearly as terrifying as it needs to be because we barely even see him. So there's lots that could be improved about that film, but overall it's still highly underrated. Now next up is The Incredibles 2. It's a standalone film, it's perfectly fine, it's fast paced, it's entertaining, but as a sequel to the first Incredibles, for me personally it falls flat because the first Incredibles is such a classic and I watched that again hundreds of times as a child. Nostalgia alone is spectacular. It always puts a smile on my face whenever I revisit that film. But next up is Moonlight, yet another Academy Award winner which I haven't watched yet. It's very disappointing, but I can't wait to get around to that. It looks like a very captivating and intense movie. I love character dramas that fall in that category. But next up, Hacksaw Ridge, Andrew Garfield. One of those films that proves how good of an actor he is, but it's a shame that I haven't watched it yet. Next up is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The flamethrower sequence is so entertaining. I love watching the entire film just to build up to that point because the flamethrower is so over the top and ridiculous. I love it. But I love the rest of the film too. It's a great homage to classic Hollywood and Quentin Tarantino's signature style oozes all throughout it. Tarantino and Del Toro are pretty much my favourite directors, which is why I have so many of their films. But next up is Now You See Me. Very entertaining film, I will admit. One of my friends absolutely adores those two films. I don't love it on the same scale, but it's just one of those that has entertaining action sequences and the actors do a great job really breathing life into their characters and playing off of each other with their fantastic chemistry. Next up is Red State. This film disappointed me. I was kind of expecting a little bit better, especially given at the back it's given high praise, so that's why you don't always trust the advertisements on here, because the film was incredibly preachy, the themes were awfully executed, and I just didn't enjoy it as much as I was expecting. The gratuitous violence wasn't nearly enough in there to keep me hooked. But moving on, we have yet another famous horror film that was ruined by a remake thing. Can't wait to be watching more of this whenever I get around to it. I've only seen clips and I know that it's even one of the things that went on to inspire Among Us, which is interesting in and of itself. Next up is my favourite Transformers movie, Bumblebee, because this is the only Transformers movie in it to have any sort of heart and characterization. In this, Bumblebee and Haley Steinfeld's character, Charlie Watson's her name, they feel like actual characters, and so because of that you sympathise with them, you care for them, and it makes the action sequences all the more intense. Like, sure, they're not as visually impressive as other Transformers films, but we start this film off on Cybertron, which is interesting visuals right off the bat, which got me eternally squealing being a huge Transformers fan. But it's just a film that has charm, it has heart, and you enjoy it for those reasons. Even if it is a film smaller in scale than the other Transformers movies. Now, next up is Keanu Reeves in John Wick 3, a thoroughly entertaining action film that has fast pacing from beginning to end. I love this style of action and it's just so much fun to watch. Next up is The Green Mile, another film that you should definitely prepare tissues for because it is incredibly sad. I cannot wait to get around to watching this, but I know the ending already. I think everybody knows the ending. It's a very famous film for the raw emotion you feel towards the end of it, so I am dreading the day that I watch this and start bawling my eyes out, but I'm also looking forward to it because there's nothing I like more than a film so captivating that you have those emotions behind it. It's the true showcase of a good film. But next up we have Jurassic World Dominion. Not such a good film, but I love this cover art. The black, the gold is spectacular, and the extended edition, in this dinosaur movie we finally get more actual dinosaurs, so that's obviously the best part behind the film for me. Jurassic World Dominion. It's fun, but it's not great, and there are certain sequences and certain plot lines in the film that I think should have been cut entirely to instead favour the stronger parts of the film. Now next up we have Spider-Man Far From Home, easily the worst chapter of this MCU Spider-Man trilogy, but I love how relatable it is. Peter Parker, I connect to him on a very personal scale in this film, given that this is very much a film centralised around the human element of these superheroes, the crushes they have, the teenage life. It's actually quite captivating. But next up is the much superior Spider-Man movie, my favourite Spider-Man movie, Into the Spider-Verse. Bring on the sequel, baby. I'm so excited. This film is innovative. It's not even good, it's innovative for animation style, for frame rate drops. It looks like a comic book brought to life, so that's colourful in of itself. Miles is a fantastic character. So what's there to say about this film that hasn't already been said? It is fucking brilliant. I'm bringing out the swearing and all sorts for this. But next up is one of my favourite movies of all time, How to Train Your Dragon 2. For all emotion behind this film, the character arcs, the darker tone, it's great for addressing a dual audience, and it's just such an entertaining film at that. Next up is The Fault in Our Stars, very nice, nicely textured collector's sleeve, you could go as far as saying this film wasn't as emotional as I was expecting it to be, and it does take shocking twists and turns, which are certainly, well, they take you off guard, so you feel more surprised than upset by it, and it's a fine film, I suppose. If you want an emotional film, then I guess you could get that from it. But outside of that, it's just not a particularly well-crafted film and nothing that is to write home about, which is why I'm not writing home about it. We're just going to move on already to Rush. This film surprised me. I was not expecting it to be nearly as good as it was. It reminds me of Le Mans 66, which is actually coming up later in the collection video, but as you can tell, it has a very nice collector's sleeve to it. And the performances here are brilliant. The actors really know what they're doing. They breathe life to their characters, make them feel like actual characters. This one's also red, which makes it unique in and of itself, when displaying it as part of the collection, mind you. But I just love how fast-paced this film is, the acting behind it, just the characters, everything that goes into that film. It's a rush, you could go as far to say. Now, Gravity I actually own twice, but this is the collector's sleeve version, so if I ever were to get rid of one of my versions, it would be the other one that doesn't have a collector's sleeve, even though this collector's sleeve is a little bit damaged because CEX is bloody useless. Now, next up is going to be Flash Gordon for the 40th anniversary. I can't believe I haven't watched this yet. It's a massive shame, and I cannot wait to correct that mistake. Toy Story 4. Weakest of the Toy Story films, if you were to ask me, but still perfectly enjoyable. In fact, I would give this a solid 10 out of 10. That just goes to show you how good the Toy Story franchise is. Woody's arc in this is spectacular, and it justifies this film's existence because it brings a true ending to his story, even if it does subvert what the character was previously known for. But that's because the character previously had purpose, and when he runs out of that purpose, it's his job to find a new one, and that's exactly what the arc of this film explores. I love it. But next up is Alita Battle Angel, some of the most stunning visuals I've ever seen. It's action-packed from beginning to end, which makes it fast-paced and engaging from the get-go. This world is interesting, you're immediately hooked into it. And so overall, perfectly entertaining film, this one. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and so did my dad as well. That's part of the reason why I bought the Blu-ray, so we could watch it together. The Third Man, this is an oldie but a goodie. This is obviously the HD restored edition, which I haven't watched yet, but when I have the chance to pick up a retro re-released film, I will always do such a thing. Next up is the Imitation Game, starring Doctor Strange, aka Benedict Cumberbatch, who is excellent in this film, by the way. I love his performance. And the film is just really intense. You care for these characters, you care for their goal, their mission, they're working towards it, and it's intense because they are working against a harsh timer and there are immediate stakes to it all, so it's just a well-crafted film that invests you, and I thoroughly enjoyed it for those very reasons. Okay, so next up is going to be for superhero classic Deadpool, again with a red Blu-ray rather than the regular blue, but I love this movie for fourth wall breaks, for comedic and editorial style. It's so fresh and fast-paced for the superhero genre. Next up is for Revenant. The acting in this film is spectacular, but it's just so intense. I love the execution of its story. There's just very little for me to bellyache about this film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But next up is going to be the Joker. Now, what's great about this is the exploration of the Joker's character, because you feel sorry for him, you sympathise with him, and you dread the moment he becomes the Joker. So the fact that you want so heavily for him to be rewarded in life is what makes this film so incredibly captivating and well made. Plus, the colour palette is a really great way to establish the mood and tone of the film. There's plenty of pathetic fallacy thrown in there. But next up are actually going to be two Avengers movies. We have Infinity War and Endgame. Collector's sleeves for both, and both of these films are spectacular. They work really well as one film followed by another. They're meant to do that. It's effectively part one and part two, but they're also their own isolated stories, each one having their respective beginning, middle, and end, and they're just really captivating. They do some excellent character work, and they just really bring together all these years of MCU storytelling in a satisfying manner, which obviously I thoroughly enjoy from beginning to end. There might be 6 hours combined, but it surely doesn't feel like that. Next up is Taxi Driver, yet another notorious classic that I am yet to have watched, so hopefully in the near future I will change that. This has an interesting name, The Lady in the Van. It's simple, and I was drawn to it, so I picked it up for a very cheap, low price of £1. Quantum of Solace 007, another one of Daniel Craig's films where he stars in the titular role as James Bond himself. Very cool indeed, and I can't wait to watch that for the first time. The only James Bond movie I've seen to date is No Time to Die, so I really need to change that. But next up is Dunkirk, an excellent war film, very different from your regular war films. I love all the different stories it follows in Christopher Nolan's classic visual style. Well, famous visual style, I should say. It oozes throughout the entirety of this film, which adds to its sheer entertainment value. But next up is going to be Military Wives, a perfectly decent, heartfelt, feel-good film that left me having a smile on my face once the film had ended and I left the theatre, mind you. And sometimes you just want to watch films and have a good feeling, which is why you call them the feel-good films, and that is one of the finest examples of such things. Little Woman. I love this film. The action was spectacular as the characters all had chemistry with one another. It's a really great adaptation of the very, very famous story, and you care for these characters. It's spectacular, really. And next up is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, probably my favourite of the trilogy. My second favourite, maybe even my least favourite. The three are just so tied. It's unbelievable how good all three of these films are, and this one does a great job creating a divide within either rank, because we get to see the good and the bad in either rank. There is no truly good or truly bad side, and they justify these actions. It's overall just a well-crafted movie with layers and depth that keeps you really invested and hooked. These apes are some of the most human characters ever put on film, which is pretty ironic actually. But next up is going to be Ad Astra. I understand a lot of people were very disappointed by this film because it was marketed as one thing, and it turns out it's actually a film where Brad Pitt sits down a lot and talks about his feelings, but that's what I love about it. The visuals are fucking spectacular. Once again, I'm bringing out the swear, and that's how much I love the visuals. You know I love visuals when I swear to express my love for them, and I swear down on my love for this film. Even if it didn't deliver what everyone was expecting, I was satisfied with what we got, because it was a really great characterization for Brad Pitt's character, and a visually stunning thrill ride along the way. Next up is Emma. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. Very fast-paced. The acting and the chemistry of those actors is spectacular. It has some comedic value, it has some romantic value, and overall it's just a well-balanced film with lots of enjoyable elements. But next up is The Social Network. I haven't finished this film yet. I've only watched the first half, but from that first half I can tell just how good it is. I love the performances here. And it's a great way to showcase the history behind Facebook, as it's executed in a very entertaining manner, and the characters are balanced in the way that they have really likable traits, but also really nasty traits, like they're bad, horrific, horrendous people, just all those adjectives to describe what makes this person bad, and yet they're still likable in one way or another, and that's very captivating character writing for you. But next up is Blade Runner 2049. We have the sequel to the film we saw earlier, and this is a sequel done right. We return to it several years later with more captivating character drama. It's a world that's really been ravaged, and just it's a really great evolution, and it builds upon the first in a very satisfying manner. I never even saw the first, and yet the second one I still enjoyed. It's its own isolated story with its in-depth themes and ideas. It's spectacular, and on a visual level it really invests you in this world because the visuals seem real behind it. But moving on, we have The Martian. Again, another very famous film, a winner in the best comedic category, I believe. At least a category that doesn't feel appropriate for this film from the Golden Globes, but that's just the limitation of the Golden Globe categories for you. Perfectly enjoyable film. I haven't watched it yet, which is a massive shame, because Matt Damon, again, is a favourite actor of mine. But I promise you I will change that in the near future. But next up we have Wonder Woman 1984. Rather than buying this for streaming, I waited to get the Blu-ray because I was really excited for this film. After the first one blew me away with just how incredible its characterization was, its action sequences, and that was all just so that then this film could disappoint me. This film is garbage and I hate it. But moving on, I alluded to this film earlier. Le Mans 66, one of my favourite films of the year. It came out, in fact, it stupidly came out the same year as How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, so it automatically lost out to that film for me on a personal scale. But it did win Best Editing, and it's easy to see why. The editing in this film is spectacular. And it's just one of those films that has elements that literally anyone can enjoy. For characterization, for character arcs, for writing behind the film, for craft, film buffs like me can enjoy it. And then it has all of the racing sequences that a sports fan would want to see. And obviously it has all of the car elements that fans of cars, you know, Ferraris, Fords, you get to see all of that, and so it's just a film that literally can entertain almost anyone, and that in and of itself is spectacular and a true testament to its quality. But now I'm going to grab the last few Blu-rays here, and we're going to start things off with Iron Giant, one of my childhood favourites, just like Ponyo. It's a film that I saw the trailer for hundreds of times on one of my old videotapes, and I finally got around to watching it a couple of years back, and I love it. It's easily one of the best non-Disney animated films out there. But speaking of some of the best films out there, War for Planet of the Apes, this works on so many levels. It is heart-wrenching, but that is juxtaposed by heartfelt emotions, and so it's an intense movie, but it's really uplifting in other manners, and it's just one which you are invested in from beginning to end. A truly spectacular film, that one. On a visual level, it's also outstanding. Finding my way back, I unfortunately haven't watched this one yet, but Ben Affleck, instant win, so what could possibly go wrong? I'm sure I will enjoy it when I eventually get around to it. Drive Angry, Nicolas Cage plays Nicolas Cage, and it's a film that highly disappointed me. I was expecting more from a Nicolas Cage Amber Heard team up, but unfortunately it just kind of fell flat. There's plenty of driving and plenty of angry in it, so the title isn't exactly a lie, but it's just not as entertaining as I was expecting it would be. I was at least expecting entertaining bad, not just bad. But anyway, La La Land, a very pleasant surprise. Normally I'm not into these sort of films, but this is one of the films that got me hooked on musicals. I love the characterization, the songs are catchy, it's a well shot film because the cinematography is excellent, it's colourful, it really stands out, and La La Land is just a film that is engaging and entertaining from beginning to end. I thoroughly enjoyed it. If Beale Street Could Talk, I've not watched this one yet. I've been meaning to watch it for ages. Cannot wait until I change that. Maybe next year when I'm talking about it, I can talk about the film itself because it looks intriguing. But next up is Logan. This also includes the Noir edition. Logan, a very famous comic book film for its quality, and I can attest to that. It's an excellent film. But moving on, we have The Conjuring once again, but this is the collector's sleeve with excellent artwork, so this is one I shall keep, the other one is one I shall get rid of. Then we have The Personal History of David Copperfield. This film surprised me. When I first watched it in theatres, I fell asleep halfway through, I got bored, but then upon my second rewatch, that was when the comedy really hit for me. I suppose knowing the style and tone of the film from the beginning and throughout just helped me to engage with this on a more deeper level, and I thoroughly enjoyed it for that reason. It's comedic, it has really great characters, the actors have great chemistry with one another, it's just incredibly funny, which the bottom of the box art was advertising, and it lived up to that. But our final, well, almost our final two collector's sleeves, we have Gandhi and Doctor Sleep, I would say two excellent films. I've seen Doctor Sleep and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the ending was justified, but then Gandhi is one that I've been meaning to watch, so hopefully I can do such a thing in the near future. But I almost said those were my last two collector sleeves. I would be lying if I said that, because my actual final collector sleeve is the Men in Black trilogy. I quite enjoyed the first one. It was very unique and fresh for its time because of its distinctive tone. I love the actors, their chemistry really oozes off one another. Number 3 is also decent, but number 2 was hot garbage and I didn't enjoy that one nearly as much. It's just a really goofy and weird film, and because of that, it's just something that you don't regularly see, and it executes perfection in its goofiness. And it's one collector's sleeve containing the entire trilogy. It's a collection, in other words, which brings us nicely onto our next category for the collection video. And of that category would be the movie collection, so we're going to kick things off with the Karate Kid collection. That's a compilation of 4 movies. I've only seen the first one. I jumped from the first one straight to Cobra Kai, so obviously there are characters from backgrounds that I haven't seen yet, like Karate Kid 2 and Karate Kid 3. But I love the first Karate Kid. It's a classic. No wonder why they remade it. But the remake definitely had enough changes to justify it. And perfectly enjoyable. But Cobra Kai is really the highlight of the entire franchise, if you were to ask me. I love what Cobra Kai did with its legacy characters and its new characters. But moving on, we have Bad Boys trilogy. These films surprised me. The first two are definitely some of the highlights of Michael Bay's career, because Michael Bay doesn't typically make good films, but these are the exceptions. And number 3, Bad Boys for Life, was a massive surprise. The trailers looked kind of garbage, and the film came out in January, normally a month where the filmmakers have no faith in their film, so they throw it out in theatres in January. But this one, I tip my hat off to Bad Boys for Life. It was a surprising thrill ride that kept me hooked and engaged. I love the characterization, and the action was incredibly fun. As cherry on top of the cake. But next up we have a Quentin Tarantino collection. So this features Pulp Fiction, the 2 Kill Bill volumes, Jackie Brown and Reservoir Dogs. Now Kill Bill was originally obviously filmed as one long 4-hour film, but the studio said nope, it can't be quite as long as that, so Quentin Tarantino was forced to split it in 2. Very interesting backstory behind those films right there, but I haven't seen a single one of them, so I'm hoping to change that in future. 21 and 22 Jump Street. I remember watching 21 Jump Street, not liking it all that much because the comedy was probably beyond my understanding. I watched it when I was a little too young. Then obviously they made the sequel too, and I haven't watched the sequel, neither have I seen the first one in a very long time, so I'm hoping to watch through them both at some point in the near future. The Cornetto trilogy, love Edgar Wright, and all of these films are the highlight of his entire career. Shaun of the Dead is hilarious, one of my favourite zombie movies to date. I love how it's a zombie film focused on the comedy rather than the horror. It's fresh and something very much welcomed, and makes it distinctive compared to other horror films as well. Well, not even horror films, other zombie films I should say. Hot Fuzz is also hilarious, gratuitous violence, classic British culture exploration. There's very little about Hot Fuzz to not like, and it's my favourite of Edgar Wright's films. World's End is also a classic and incredibly British, so definitely all of those films are fun and fast-paced, exactly what I'd want out of Edgar Wright classics. The Transformers 4-movie collection. This was £1, which is the only reason I bought it, because all 4 of these films are garbage. Even the first one, which is easily the best of the 4, has its issues with its pacing and its crude humour and its characters, especially the Transformers, which is what the franchise is based off of, so at least give the robots some sort of personality. But that's clearly asking for too much. Michael Bay was too busy having these huge chunks of metal punch each other. Anyway, we have Back to the Future trilogy next. It's a very shiny box art. I do thoroughly enjoy that about it, but this trilogy is famous for its unique execution, its camera work, its storytelling, all being well crafted and engaging from beginning to end. I love those stories, they are classic. I love performances, they are classic also. So ultimately what I'm saying here is what's not to love about the Back to the Future trilogy. The Dark Knight trilogy, another famous trilogy. It's notorious for being some of Christopher Nolan's best work, as he really does put his own spin on Batman to create something captivating, engaging. I love Christian Bale in for the titular role as Batman too, so those are just films that you can't really go wrong with. They have great action, great characters. But next up, we have the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible collection. I've seen not one of those films, so we're just going to move on without further ado to the Bourne collection. I told you earlier with Jason Bourne that we was going to look into the rest of this franchise with the other 4 films. And yet again, I haven't seen any of them. So all of these collections I need to get around to if I haven't done so already. And some of which I just, like 21 Jump Street, need to rewatch already. You can not even see the artwork from that angle. But yes, those, my friend, are all the collections. And that next category is going to be the special editions. So we're talking about steelbooks and anniversary re-releases. Beginning with Cuba 2 Strings. Man, do I love this steelbook. Obviously it still has the outside protector sleeve, but it's just so artful. It really is a fine expression of the tone and style the film takes on a visual level. The film is also excellent. It's my favourite of Leica's productions, with the exception of Coraline, based on nostalgia alone. But in terms of the film crafted, the story and the characters, they are so investing, and I adore every aspect of it. It's fast-paced from beginning to end, and I can't fault it. But next up is the Titanic Special Edition. Multiple bonus feature discs and 3D version of the film, as well as the regular version of the film. What's to say about this film that hasn't been said already? This is James Cameron at his best. The production design is excellent, the characterization is excellent, the emotional beats, they really land. In fact, they hit you hard. It's like a fucking dump truck to the face, and I love it. The emotional investment I have within this film and the ultimate depressive nature behind it. It's so well captivated, and it leaves a long-lasting impact on you. I still am crying from this film to this day. I just think about this film, I hear the soundtrack, instant tears, it's guaranteed. But next up is going to be Casino Royale. This is the deluxe edition, so there's plenty included in this, not just the Blu-ray. plenty of bonus features, so that's just pretty cool. It's a James Bond film, Daniel Craig. Obviously I haven't seen it because, as I said earlier, No Time to Die is the only one I have watched, but I'm hoping to rectify that in future. From a premium collection, we have Clash of the Titans. This film has been remade multiple times, or at least it's been made with similar titles. Other films have been made with similar titles, I should say. There's Wrath of the Titans. This one is no doubt better. From what I've heard, it's better, but I haven't watched it yet. The next up, another film I haven't watched, but it's the 30th Anniversary Ultimate Edition. Oh, now that sounds exciting. That really makes me want to shut up and watch it already. So I might even do that once this video is said and done with. We'll have to wait and see. But a very famous film. Its title alone is quite memorable. You hear it and you're like, ooh, that movie. So yeah, very much an intriguing one that I can't wait to get around to. But this one is a film that I have seen maybe hundreds of times already because I love How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, and this is the limited edition gift set. So you have two like mini Funkos in there, and then the Blu-ray inside. It's not actually the Blu-ray because I own a 4K Ultra HD of How to Train Your Dragon, so you can see that right there, and it's basically what I keep in here because I no longer have the regular Blu-ray and 3D Blu-ray. I sold it. But who needs to hold on to those when you have the 4K Ultra? And yes, the discs are inside, so I still have a Blu-ray disc and a 4K Ultra disc inside here. I went to Derby to go pick up the 4K Ultra HD because it was my first ever one. I had to do it for a film of this caliber. I love it so much. It's a prestigious film. And I got this day one off of Amazon because I was so looking forward to watching this outside of a theatrical setting. But that had a 4K Ultra inside it, so that kind of alludes to our final category of the collection video. Let's get to it without further ado. So for this final category, no doubt you're wondering why I'm in different clothing and why I'm at a different angle altogether. We'll address that, but first things first, let's talk about the 4K Ultras I possess. The first one is for Lighthouse, which has a black Blu-ray case. So this is actually one of my regular Blu-rays even. I just accidentally mixed it in with the rest of the 4K Ultra HDs because of the packaging being the same colour, but I do believe this naturally comes in a black coloured Blu-ray box because of the fact that it's for Lighthouse. For black really matches it aesthetically, given that this is a noir film. But enough of the Lighthouse. Our next 4K Ultra HD is actually Spider-Man No Way Home, so that makes this our second 4K Ultra HD right behind How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. I picked this up because it's such a good film and this is the most prestigious format in which to own it, so it's very nice to have my favourite Spider-Man MCU film on 4K Ultra HD. But the final one is actually going to be Top Gun Maverick. As you can see, I have the collector sleeve for this one in all, but it is the 4K Ultra HD, not the regular Blu-ray. I picked this up because I love this movie, and again, it's the most prestigious format of which to own this. The glare is also quite nice, as you've seen already. The disc is still inside, which is rare for these, but I'm no doubt going to watch this as soon as I'm done recording this video. But this explains as to why my attire has changed and why the angle of the framing has changed. It's because I was waiting on this to be delivered. This literally got delivered on the same day I'm recording this clip, which is a day after I recorded the rest of the video. So I waited a day in order for this to arrive so that then I could add this to part of the collection showcase. And that pretty much sums it up. It's why I'm in a different attire and why the camera angle is different. My Top Gun Maverick just about slipped off the edge of my bed right now. But close enough has been said and done. We've covered the entire Blu-ray collection. If you watched this far into the video, thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. And with that being said, next week's Film Fridays is going to be dedicated to my most anticipated films going into 2023. Something very much to look forward to. You guys might even hear of films on my personal list that I'm anticipating that maybe you didn't even know were coming out this year, so there's something educational behind that video, I guess. But it's just going to be fun to talk about films that I'm really fucking excited about. But enough of swearing, enough of everything in general. We're going to bring today's Film Friday to a close. Don't worry, the rest of the episodes won't be quite as long as this one, but I feel as though to kick off a series, we've got to do so with a bang, and the entirety of the collection showcase as part of our annual tradition was the perfect way to do so. And this is coming out very late on Friday or very early Saturday morning because that Top Gun Maverick 4K Ultra HD just arrived. It is Friday I'm recording this on, so when this video goes up depends on how long the export and uploading of this video takes. So with all that being said and done, let's roll that outro without further ado. I cannot, in good conscience, end off this video without first thanking all of my incredible channel members whose continued support help make these videos possible. Without them, these videos would be near impossible to make, so from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate every last one of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, there are plenty of options on screen now to explore, and please consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. On that note, this video is coming to an end, so thank you so much as always for watching. Until the next video arises, peace!